Everyone else is temporary. So if you're a temporary foreign worker or a temporary international student, or you're an asylum seeker who is waiting to see whether or not your asylum claim is affirmed, those are all temporary citizens. And so my question is, if you're only coming here on a one-year work permit, why are you bringing your family and expecting taxpayers to pay for that? It's $12,000 for every child who goes into a child care system. It's $12,000 for every child who goes into the K-12 education system. We've already addressed this at the university level because international students have to pay the cost of their university education. But on average, we've got individuals who would cost the healthcare system about $6,000. And so those are just give you some idea of why it is we have to have a different approach. And we're frankly an outlier in this. Ontario, for instance, does not offer healthcare coverage to the families of temporary foreign workers, and the Canada Health Act has no requirement for temporary residents, so that would be one thing I would say. But we're also an outlier. Canada's an outlier compared to the world. If you look at Japan, Australia, the UK, Switzerland, Spain, UAE, all of these countries have different requirements for temporary residents to either pay a fee or provide private or get private insurance for healthcare.
Kamusta mga kababayan? Salamat sa Diyos at meron na naman tayong isang mabuting pagkakataon na magkita-kitang muli at ang dalangin ko pong parati sa Diyos. Sana kayo ay lagi nasa mabuting kalagayan at maraming salamat po doon sa mga patuloy na sumusuporta sa ating channel, patuloy nanonood ng ating mga videos at lalo na doon sa mga nag-aantabay sa mga latest na mga happenings dito sa Canada. At ngayon ngang araw na ito, isang mainit na usapin na naman na para bang hindi matapos-tapos na tipong parati na lang ang naiipit at pinag-iinitan ay ang mga temporary residents dito sa Canada. At ngayon nga ay dito naman sa Alberta because it's about to change. Who qualifies for publicly funded na mga benefits including health care, because Premier Danielle Smith is proposing a referendum that could impact health benefits and public services for temporary residents. At pag sinabi po natin mga temporary residents, ang mga kasama po dito ay ang mga sumusunod: temporary foreign workers, international students, and even yung mga asylum seekers. Ang sabi kasi ng mga supporter, it's about protecting taxpayers. Pero nagbabayad din naman ng taxes ang mga temporary foreign workers at saka mga international students or asylum seekers pag sila ay nagtatrabaho dito sa Canada. And this could affect families who are legally working and contributing to the economy. So, what's really being proposed? Who would be affected? And what could this mean for Alberta's future? So mga kababayan, panoorin po natin ang video ito.
We ready, Sam?
Yep, go for it.
All right, good morning, and thank you all for coming. I'm pleased to be joined by Minister of Justice and Attorney General Mickey Amery. Last night, I shared a televised message laying out Alberta's fiscal situation and announcing a referendum that will be held later this year. It was a lot to take in, and we know that Albertans have questions about the specifics. We're here this morning to share more details and to answer those questions. But first, I'd like to say a few words on the situation our province is facing. Next week, our government will introduce the 2026 provincial budget. And as I outlined last night, we've had to grapple with a deficit resulting from low oil prices and runaway population growth. Our medium and long-term solutions will see us double energy production to increase our resource revenues and continue to invest future surpluses in the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund. The Heritage Fund is the true long-term strategy for addressing resource revenue volatility, and we have doubled it in size since 2021. to now over $30 billion. If we stay the course and continue to leave the investment income in the fund, we can reach our goal of $250 billion by 2050, which would allow us to weather oil price drops while still growing it for future generations. But we also have to address our budget situation right now. Alberta has dealt with low energy prices before, and we've absorbed periods of high population growth, but we've never dealt with them both at the same time, at least never quite as acutely as we have over the last few years. The key difference this time is around that federal immigration policies have foundationally changed. Ottawa used to prioritize economic migrants and newcomers with in-demand skills. This approach benefited our entire country, and especially Alberta, where it was one of the single biggest drivers of our success. More recently, however, federal selection criteria widened to include asylum seekers, international students, and low-skilled temporary foreign workers. In other words, recent federal policies have placed less emphasis on individuals who could immediately contribute to our economy. At the same time, Ottawa increased the volume of newcomers to an unprecedented level, and many of those newcomers have ended up in Alberta. That's not a surprise. Our province has attracted new arrivals for generations now. We've got a strong economy, lower living costs, and a high quality of life out here that is pretty irresistible as a package. What's different now is the scale and speed of the growth and the impact that it's had on our public services. The growth we've experienced is far beyond what our healthcare and education systems and our other social programs can sustain. Every new arrival, particularly if they bring their family, draws on Alberta's public services. Not every newcomer is a net contributor to the provincial revenues that fund those services, and that's the crux of the challenge facing us. To address this challenge, our government won't be resorting to deep and disruptive cuts to core social services. We'll continue to invest in healthcare, education, and the infrastructure and social programs needed to support a strong and diversified economy and to maintain our world-class standard of living. These investments will give our public services a chance to catch up with our population growth. Crucially, we'll also act to address the underlying issue, which is out-of-control temporary residents. At the end of the day, Alberta and our taxpayers shouldn't be expected to foot the bill for federal experiments in open borders. This is a tough topic for many of us. Welcoming newcomers has been and will continue to be a part of our story from the very beginning and into the future. And Albertans are some of the friendliest and most hospitable people you will find anywhere. I spent a lot of the last year talking to and listening to people during the Alberta Next panel, and I've never been more convinced than I am right now. But another thing that the panel encountered in every part of the province was frustration. Albertans are frustrated that their kids' educations are being affected. They are frustrated that their teenagers can't find a part-time job. They're frustrated that it's harder and harder to find an affordable place to live or a family doctor in their part of town. They're frustrated that they've never had a say in any of this, that they've never been given a chance to vote for these policies, which have nevertheless had a huge impact on the communities where they live and the public services that they use. Throughout the Alberta Next sessions, in every community, the issues that came up most often concerned immigration, as well as Alberta's fiscal and constitutional role within a united Canada. And the time has come to act on these issues. As I mentioned last night, the changes we're proposing represent a serious departure from the way we do things now. And our government believes we need a democratic mandate to carry them out. That's why we'll be holding a referendum on October 19th, 2026, asking Albertans to weigh in on our immigration system and on reforming the Constitution to strengthen Alberta's position within a united Canada. We will be asking Albertans if they support reducing immigration to sustainable levels, prioritizing economic migrants and Albertans' access to jobs, setting fair rules around who can access provincially funded services, and strengthening the integrity of our provincial elections. This is about fairness for Albertans and safeguarding the long-term sustainability of our public services. The referendum will also ask Albertans if they support working with other provinces to rebalance the Constitution, to strengthen provincial control over courts, to abolish the unelected federal Senate, to give the ability to opt out of federal programs without funding penalties, and get stronger protection for provincial laws. We know these are big questions, and their answers will have a major bearing on Alberta's future. That's why we're announcing the referendum today, when it's being held 8 months from now. We want to ensure that there's enough time to give these issues a fair hearing. We want to give Albertans a chance to consider their answers carefully before casting their ballots. The challenges we're facing have presented us with some tough choices, but as our government prepares to deliver the 2026 budget, it's clear that doing nothing is one of the options not available to us. And while Alberta's future is full of promise, Albertans are counting on us today to protect and strengthen the public services that they rely on. And that's exactly what we intend to do. I look forward to the debate on these critical issues, both in the legislature and in the public square over the next 8 months.
Hi, Premier. Matt Skase, Globe and Mail. One of your questions in here cites what you call an Alberta-approved immigration status. This is on a referendum question. You announced it last night. What is that, and what would qualify someone to be an Alberta-approved immigrant?
Well, what we're looking at is a model very similar to what Quebec has had since 1991 with their Quebec-Canada Accord, where they have total control over their economic migrants. And so that would put us in a position where we would deliver a work permit. If that person wanted to move on to permanent immigration status, then we would have a provincial nominee program so that they could become a permanent resident. And then the federal government would determine citizenship at a time if that individual wanted to become a citizen. But we have to make sure that we're involved at the very beginning stages of determining what the market need is, issuing the permits so that we can connect the people who have the jobs with the person who need the jobs with the right skills, and then also creating a pathway to permanent citizenship. And so it would be very much modeled after what we see in Quebec.
Okay. And on another topic, what is your evidence that non-tax-paying immigrants are using health or education system in sweeping numbers, and specifically how much does an immigrant cost to the healthcare system in their first year in the province?
Well, think about this. I mean, let's put aside citizens and permanent residents, because permanent residents have made a commitment to the country. You know that they are going to be here and be a contributing member of the economy year after year after year, and so that's part of the reason why citizens and permanent immigrants have similar status. I've met many permanent immigrants, actually, who at citizenship ceremonies who were permanent for 20 years before they decided to get citizenship. So let's put that aside. Everyone else is temporary. So if you're a temporary foreign worker or a temporary international student, or you're an asylum seeker who is waiting to see whether or not your asylum claim is affirmed, those are all temporary citizens. And so my question is, if you're only coming here on a one-year work permit, why are you bringing your family and expecting taxpayers to pay for that? It's $12,000 for every child who goes into a child care system. It's $12,000 for every child who goes into the K-12 education system. We've already addressed this at the university level because international students have to pay the cost of their university education. But on average, we've got individuals who would cost the healthcare system about $6,000. And so those are just give you some idea of why it is we have to have a different approach. And we're frankly an outlier in this. Ontario, for instance, does not offer healthcare coverage to the families of temporary foreign workers, and the Canada Health Act has no requirement for temporary residents, so that would be one thing I would say. But we're also an outlier. Canada's an outlier compared to the world. If you look at Japan, Australia, the UK, Switzerland, Spain, UAE, all of these countries have different requirements for temporary residents to either pay a fee or provide get private insurance for healthcare. And just to give you an idea, we looked at the numbers of children of temporary residents who are currently in our K-12 education system, and it cost about $500 million last year and $500 million this year. So these are significant numbers, and that's just one program.
So bottom line expense, what's your number for health and education?
It's tough to know. I mean, we'd have to do the figuring out, but I can tell you, we had in 2021, to give you an idea of what a normal number of asylum seekers would be, it was 941. In 2024, in 2022, it was 1,995. In 2023, it was 6,050. In 2024, it was 10,050. And in 2025, as of November 30th, it was 7,125. So you can clearly see the trend. And what happens is we have no control over asylum seekers, whether they're approved or not. The federal government has such a convoluted process, it can take years and years before their claim is deemed to be legitimate. And oftentimes, the cost of supporting that falls to provincial governments. So if the federal government has a particular policy, they should be the ones paying for that. If people who are coming here for temporary reasons, then they should make sure that they have proper insurance, just as other provinces do, and just as required internationally. And that, and then we should support those who are permanent residents and Alberta and Canadian citizens, because they're going to be the permanent taxpayers. So I think that we just have to align our policies with the standards that we're seeing internationally.
Shouldn't you have a number
We're going to have to go to the next
and
question. We
immigration are
got
the core
6 people
issues
here
here
behind
on the
you,
deficit?
Matt. Fourth
Look,
question.
I can tell you one thing. Again, we don't have an individual. No, we don't track residents and how much they use. All I can give you is averages about what things cost. We were able to see for education, just because we went through for the first time a comprehensive review of what is happening in our classrooms. So that's why I was able to give you that number. But I can tell you, when we look at our budget, we have about 225,000 residents who drive about $14 to $16 billion worth of spending. We have a certain number of residents who are very high users of our multitude of social programs. Now, I don't know what the breakdown is between those who are permanent citizens, Canadians, or permanent residents, Canadian citizens, or temporary workers, but we've got to find that out. Part of the reason we're bringing through our new driver's license attached to a healthcare number is we discovered we had 500,000 more people with healthcare numbers than we have on paper, the number of residents in Alberta. These are problems, and this is driving costs. And so we're taking measures to make sure that those who are Canadian citizens, who came through the permanent immigration process and got their permanent residency, are covered first when it comes to the opportunities available in the social programs. And those who are temporary, we're treating them as temporary. That this is what we're proposing. I mean, Albertans may decide that they disagree, but this is what we heard in our Alberta Next panel. It's part of the reason we're putting it to the people, because it is a substantial change in policies. And if we can get some more detailed figures, we will try to. But I can only give you sort of the average cost of what a typical person ends up costing our different social programs when they come to Alberta.
Will you commit to more data?
Thanks, Matt. Let's get to our next question.
Well, if we can get it, for sure we will.
Hi, Premier Mark Valeni with CTV Calgary. Some political analysts have called your proposed fee on non-permanent residents a, quote, head tax, and they argue that linking Alberta's budget pressures to immigration risks demonizing newcomers or discriminating against them. How do you respond to those concerns that this framing unfairly targets immigrants rather than addressing broader economic factors?
Well, I think people should look at the reality of what's happening in other jurisdictions. Ontario does not offer health care coverage for families of temporary foreign workers. Canada Health Act has no requirement for temporary residents. There was just a ruling on that, an affirmation on that last week. In Alberta, disability programs, like persons with developmental disabilities, FCHD and H, are already only accessible to permanent residents and citizens. So that is one part of our system that we have only made available to permanent residents and citizens. So this would be an expansion to two of our most costly social services, which are our healthcare, education, and seniors programming. But again, I think we just need to look internationally at what is happening. In the UK, they're having a debate about whether to extend the period before you can receive social services from 5 years to 10 years. That's the debate that's happening in Europe. We have had, in Canada, our population in the last 3 years has grown faster than literally anywhere in the world. I think the only place Alberta has not grown faster than is Sudan. And what was driving that in Sudan was a civil war. So to give you some idea just how extraordinary the changes have been in the last 3 years, to see the population of Canada go up by 6 million people. And we didn't have a public debate about that. No one asked us as provincial leaders. No one asked the public whether we wanted to throw out an immigration policy that had served us well for 40 years with an experiment on bringing in a massive number of temporary workers and students. No one asked anybody whether or not they approved that. So we're asking them now. Do we want to continue this, or do we want to try to go back to the normal immigration policy that we had that served us so well for 40 years, where we give the priority to economic migrants, and those that want to stay, we find a pathway to permanent citizenship, or permanent residency, and then ultimately citizenship?
You've touched on this. Just to follow up, as you crunch the numbers on this policy, how many new Albertans did you determine these policy changes will impact? And how much do you think this will save the government per year?
Well, I can tell you a couple of things. Like, at least the new administration at the federal level has come to the same conclusion that we have. And I'll just quote from the budget, the federal budget, acknowledging that our immigration was built to standardize and evaluate newcomers, so the admission was based on a person's merits. And over time, the system has evolved in its complexity and its efficiency has waned. In recent years, the system became even harder to manage and less functional as the pace of new arrivals began to exceed Canada's capacity to absorb and support newcomers in the way we are used to doing. So even the federal government realized that the policies of Justin Trudeau were absolutely unsustainable, and it's going to take a few years for that to work through the system as the number of temporary workers and international students, as their work permits end up getting retired and they end up leaving the country. But the point is we want to make sure that this doesn't happen again. This policy happened without any consultation with anyone, and it happened without anybody understanding what was going on. And so that's part of the reason, is that it's good that they've now understood that we have a problem. But I just look at the asylum numbers that are 10 times what they were from 10 years ago this year, even though, or in 2025. And that whole year was under a new administration. So has there really been a change? I guess that's the question that we have to ask. We've written letters to make sure that we're getting a narrower category of job availability for our job description and ability to work in areas depending on our unemployment rates. And so it's going to be on a go forward, I would hope, quite a restriction. If you consider that we had 600,000 people come into our province in the last 4 years, if you go back to what a sustainable immigration level is, it's about 0.6% of your population. So just to get the numbers there, if we went back to a normal level of newcomer arrivals, it'd be about 50,000 people a year, because we're now 5 million people. We've been getting 150,000 or more a year, so 3 times the amount that we're able to absorb. That can't continue. So in a future state, I want us to return to something more like a 50,000 target, with 2/3 of them focused on economic migrants, and those chosen by the Alberta government. That's why we keep on asking for the ability to affirm more provincial nominees, because we have a large number of people who are working in good-paying jobs, fitting in, want the pathway to permanent citizenship, and the federal government won't let us. Instead, they've been prioritizing all of these temporary status of newcomers rather than the ones who they should be prioritizing, as we have historically, which is the economic migrants. So a future state, I think we should probably have about 50,000 total numbers coming to Alberta each year, about 35,000 of those economic migrants, and a much smaller number of asylum seekers, international students, and family reunification.
Okay, but how much are you thinking that this will save the province, and will this change be enough to eliminate the deficit? And if not, why not look at other options like cutting services or raising taxes?
Well, I mean, this is what we're talking about, is making sure the services are prioritized to the people who've registered a permanent stake in our country and our province. And that's Canadian citizens and permanent residents. And temporary individuals should be treated as that. Temporary, and tourists. I mean, I don't think any of us in this room would think that we would be able to go and work for a year somewhere else, bring our entire family, use their healthcare system and their education system. Like, just think of what your expectation would be if you were going to go to work somewhere temporarily for a year. And we just have to have the same standards here. I think because we had some confidence in the federal government that they were managing this properly, because they were managing it properly, up until we got to COVID. And then post-COVID, it went completely off the rails with a completely insane policy that every single province is suffering with. There isn't a single province that is managing to run a balanced budget this year. So combination of the decisions of Justin Trudeau to suppress all the ways that we could make money and earn revenue, at the same time as expanding all of the costs associated with delivering very expensive social programs, has put us in a position where it's going to take a little bit of time for it to sort itself out.
Hi, Premier. Drew Strum at Global Calgary. In January 2024, you were on a podcast saying you wanted to increase Alberta's population to more than double Alberta's population to 10 million, as well as, you know, the Alberta is Calling campaign was launched as well, looking for those economic migrants to come to Alberta. I guess, you know, what was the metric that caused this change in your stance on migration when this had been something that you'd been championing for a number of years, including your letter to Justin Trudeau in 2024?
Well, look, I mean, my letter to Justin Trudeau was about what I talked about before, that we need to have more control over permanent residents and provincial nominees, because those are the ones who've come here, found a job, fit in, want to stay, and want a pathway to permanent citizenship. They reduced us down to, I think, 4,500. We believe it should be more like 35,000, that Alberta should be controlling the number of economic migrants and matching those with the skills with the jobs that are available. And that stays true. That's the same position that I had 3 years ago and the same position I have today. I think it's a matter of time scale. We certainly can't double our population in 3 years, which it seems like the federal government was bent on doing. You can probably double your population by 2100, maybe. In Alberta, we might go a little bit faster than that because people do want to move here, and I've seen some recent demographic expectations that we might surpass British Columbia. But the pace that we were growing was unsustainable. I thought that we had the tolerance to be able to create jobs. We've been a very powerful job creator, but clearly it's broken. Like, there is a point where you have to look at the reality. And the reality is you cannot build homes fast enough to accommodate 150,000 people a year coming here. You cannot build schools fast enough to accommodate 80,000 new students coming here in 3 years. You cannot build hospitals and long-term care fast enough to be able to accommodate that population. So it's the speed. I think we can accommodate 50,000 a year, but we certainly cannot accommodate triple or quadruple that. And that's the reason why we've got to get a better handle on this.
And on net migration...
And if I may also say just one more thing. You have to remember where we were in 2022, right? We had CBC writing stories, why does no one want to live in Alberta? And talking about the U-Hauls that were leaving Alberta, because that was the case under the NDP. And then because of COVID, we actually had declining population in our province. We had school boards talking about closing down schools and eliminating school spaces. And yet when we looked at the unemployment figures at that time, and remember the program was launched before I became leader, but it was because in June we had a 4.9% unemployment rate. In July, a 4.8% unemployment rate. We had many big projects that were going to get, that were getting to final investment decision, whether it was WestJet and all the supply chain associated with that, the new de Havilland aerospace field, the net zero plastics from Dow Chemical, one of the biggest projects that we've ever had in our history. We needed to have skilled workers. If you look at our program, we coupled it with an incentive to rebate skilled workers $5,000 if they move to Alberta. We thought we were doing a very targeted ask to get skilled workers here. But as I said, we had no idea that Justin Trudeau was taking all limits off all of those programs because they didn't ask us. They didn't tell us. They just did it. And as a result, we ended up, and I think every province was in the same position, which is why the federal government has had to change gears. But we have to make sure this doesn't happen again. Like, you shouldn't be able to completely upend 40 years of established policy without talking to anyone about it, especially when the cost falls to the provinces.
You just briefly talked about all these people leaving in Alberta in 2022, where the net migration stats on the Alberta government website shows that there was a ramp up in migration to the province starting in 2021. Q3, for example, we saw 190 international people come to Alberta, the lowest it's been since 2021 after that peak that we saw in 2024. So I guess that's not exactly factual that all these people were leaving when we were seeing records amount of people coming during that time. I guess, you're kind of saying one thing when the reality shows another there.
I think you should look at the reality of what happened post-COVID. And you will see an extraordinary change that happened post-COVID. And it happened almost completely along asylum seekers, international students, and temporary workers that were low skill. And that was not what I think anyone anticipated in how our immigration program is supposed to work. We've had a very robust point system where people are able to come here based on their education, based on their facility in one of our official languages. And there's a reason for that, is because then they are job ready the moment that they arrive. If you bring a large number of people here who don't have basic skills, don't have a job, don't even speak English, then all of a sudden you've created an environment where they're going to have to rely on government services. So the federal government flipped the policy on its head. I'm pleased to see, with the pressure of all of the premiers, that they are returning to a more normal immigration policy. But we have to make sure that this doesn't happen again, because we're still in a position where we have a large number of individuals who are seeking provincial nominee status. I think we're up to 30 or 40,000. And we only have the ability to offer provincial nominee status to 6,400. And we need to have the ability to offer permanent resident status to more people, just like they do in Quebec.
Thank you. We just have time for a
going
couple
to
more.
an economic standpoint, as Mark brought up the proposed potential head tax for accessing services for some Albertans who aren't permanent residents and things like that. I guess if the federal government sees these policies potentially getting enacted and decide to withhold federal transfers, what then?
Is that what you would characterize Ontario's charging of a healthcare premium to non-permanent?
Yes.
You'd call that a head tax?
That's what it's been referred to by others.
Well, I see that it's not offside with the Canada Health Act, and the federal government hasn't punished them. So I think the federal government, in fact, issued a clarification statement last week saying that temporary foreign workers are expected to have private insurance. So I think that issue's been solved. It's not a head tax. It's if you're coming here temporarily, you're a tourist. So you got to get your own insurance. That's actually fairly standard around the world.
Follow-up, Premier. 2 years ago, I think immigration was at its peak, and this didn't happen. So why now, when the numbers seem to be on the surface more manageable?
Well, I think because it takes a number of years, and I've talked to the Prime Minister about this, he suspects it'll take about 3 years for us to work through the excessive policies that we saw in most recent years. And so that would be one issue. And we've also seen issues emerge in the media of exactly these kinds of issues where people are wanting to access programs even though they don't have a permanent status. And so we have to ask the question of the people of whether or not they think that's reasonable, or whether they want to align our policy with what we see internationally, that if you're here temporarily, you have to be able to cover yours and your family's expenses. And if you move on to permanent status, then that's a different thing. It's you get treated the same way as a citizen once you've made a commitment to be a permanent long-term taxpayer in a jurisdiction. So that's what I would say, is that we heard through the Alberta Next panel discussion that this is a priority for Albertans, and we want to see if they want to affirm these policy changes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. And we have time for a couple more. We'll head to the phones. Operator, can you put through our first caller, please?
We have a question from Robert Noto from Bloomberg News. Your line is open.
Yeah, hi. It's my understanding that Alberta has attracted a lot of tech workers from the U.S. who are on H-1B visas after they changed the policy. Those people I think have come here on temporary work visas. Won't this inhibit your ability to continue to attract or build a tech sector if those people have to come in, and I guess the companies will have to cover their health insurance?
Well, I guess what I would say is that those are workers who will often seek permanent status. So the pathway ought to be come in as a temporary worker, and if it is a good fit and you're going to stay for a longer period of time, be able to get your permanent resident status, at which point then you would qualify for the same access to programs as somebody who's a citizen. But the temporary status, especially if you're talking about those high-income tech workers, I mean, perhaps their companies should pay their insurance. If they have a high income, perhaps they should pay a premium. But what we're concerned about is the number of low-skill temporary foreign workers, international students, and asylum seekers who may not be here on a permanent basis and able to be long-term permanent taxpayers. And so we have to look at two different approaches. The approach that we want to take by taking more control over the economic migrants would be exactly what we're trying to establish here, is if we give them an Alberta work permit, and they move on to a pathway to permanent immigration, and they ultimately become a citizen, all three of those steps would qualify them for social programs. If we know that we need them, and we know that they're going to be making a long-term commitment here, we want to provide a pathway for them to be able to enjoy the same services as everyone else.
Thank you. And seeing no follow-up, we'll squeeze in one more question. Operator, could you put through our next caller, please?
Our next question comes from the line of Will Vassar from Western Standard. Your line is open.
Hi, Premier. So this morning, the Deputy Opposition Leader called this approach on immigration and the referendum an attempt to be divisive, to pit people against each other, and it's emboldening some dark and disturbing behavior. Could you comment on that?
Well, I'm accustomed to seeing the NDP try to scare people. They do that all the time. They make hysterical claims that are not true, and they're the ones who I think feed polarization and division. This is a very real and serious issue. Immigrant communities have raised this with us as well, because anyone who came here through the old system that we had are equally frustrated at what they're seeing, that there's essentially no controls, and hasn't been for a number of years. I think the official opposition is offside as well with the current leadership at the federal level, which has very clearly been working to undo a lot of the damage of these kind of policies over the last few years. And they might be even offside with their own union leadership. I've seen union leadership for many years complain that temporary foreign workers flood the market and depress not only job ability, but also depress the wages. So I would say that it's not us that's offside with where the public's at. I think it's the official opposition.
And then my follow-up, or my second question on that is, today Rachel Notley and Thomas Lukaszuk have thrown out accusations of Nazi tactics when referring to this immigration approach. Could you comment on that as well, please?
That's gross. It's just disgusting. Any mention to, if you're going to call somebody a Nazi, you better be referring to the Holocaust and the devastation that caused to the Jewish people. That is disgusting language, and it should never be used. If they want to have a serious conversation about immigration levels, let's have it. That's what a referendum is all about. And quite frankly, as I've mentioned, this is the same kind of policy that was affirmed last week by the federal government when it came to saying that temporary foreign workers should have private insurance when they arrive. It's the same policy that already exists in Ontario. And we are asking Albertans if they want to have a system that puts Albertans, citizens as well as permanent residents first when it comes to taxpayer-funded programs, and then have reasonable premiums and the ability of those who are temporary to access the programs with their own resources. But that kind of language has no place in this debate.
Thank you. And that's all the time we have for questions today. Thanks everyone for joining us.
At ano sa palagay nyo mga kababayan? Ano masasabi nyo sa referendum na sinabi dito sa announcement na ito ni Premier Danielle Smith? So I wanted to hear yung opinion nyo about this issue. And that's it for me today mga kababayan. I hope you like this video. If you do, please give it a thumbs up. And as always, more videos, more informations to come. I will see you, God willing, on my next video. Samahan nawa kayong parati ng Panginoon sa inyong pang-araw-araw na buhay at magandang araw po sa inyong lahat.